stormwater. As the MS4 permitting becomes more known to communities, you'll be starting to think about a dedicated revenue source to help you finance stormwater expenditures. You'll be hearing things about 6 minimum control measures that you need to address, a notice of intent that you need to address. And you'll need to start to think about, for most of you, that you are funding stormwater within your general fund today, funded by property taxes. So how much is stormwater costing you today? How much is it going to cost you over the next 5 years? What kind of funding plan, financing plan are you going to need to help set up a dedicated revenue source to address your stormwater needs? You'll also hear about stormwater utilities, stormwater enterprise funds. What fund should you select to help manage your stormwater? All these topics, as well as a national perspective and what Massachusetts communities are doing, are in this video. Welcome to the Stormwater Enterprise Fund video. This is one of several videos discussing stormwater. This video is going to focus more on the financing, accounting, and budgeting side of stormwater. We're going to cover today 3 basic topics. One, the history and overview of stormwater. 2, the financing concepts of stormwater. And 3, more from an implementation point of view, how do you set up a stormwater utility and what accounting fund do you use? So the history is going to be more national because stormwater is just giving birth in Massachusetts. So we're going to talk some general things more nationally. With respect to stormwater financing concepts, we'll focus on stormwater costs. What do you need to think about to develop a budget to address your stormwater needs from a cost point of view? And secondly, how are you going to fund it from a revenue point of view? And the third area is, given the costs and the revenue, what utility or what fund are you going to use? Do you need to set up a stormwater utility under Chapter 8316? Are you going to account for this in the general fund? Are you going to account for this in a special revenue fund? Are you going to account for this in an enterprise fund? What are the advantages, disadvantages of those? So from a history and overview point of view, as I said, this is more national. Stormwater utilities have been around since 1970. We've seen nationally and in Massachusetts an increase in their number over the last few years. Going back to 2004, we had about 400 stormwater utilities. And now with the MPDES and MS4 requirements, we're seeing those as major drivers. So one person has estimated there'll be over 4,000 utilities for stormwater by the end of this calendar year. That's quite a jump from the 400 going back about 12 years. Florida has the most stormwater utilities, and there are also high concentrations in Washington, Oregon, and California. Massachusetts is just starting, as there are only three official stormwater enterprise funds reported to the Department of Revenue based on the 2015 reports. So Massachusetts stormwater utilities and enterprise funds, to me, are the next big thing that is coming down the road. With respect to funding, the average monthly charge for residential properties is in the $3 to $4 range for existing utilities, or roughly $36 to $48 per year. That's nationally, and that's not Massachusetts. Your stormwater costs are buried within your general fund taxes for most of the people looking at this video. We'll talk about later the increase in stormwater fees and isolating those in terms of a bill. So in Massachusetts, we have a fund structure for the general fund, special revenue funds, and we also have special acts. Massachusetts general laws provide a vehicle by which you can account, by which you can budget, by which you can report on stormwater activities. One is an enterprise fund, and there's two statutes for enterprise funds. One in 1988, Chapter 40, Section 39K, and more recently, Chapter 44, Section 53, F and a half. A stormwater utility may be created by adopting Chapter 83, Section 16. Once you adopt this utility, it automatically sets up a special revenue fund for you. And thirdly, you have Chapter 40, Section 1A, which establishes a district, and one of those districts can be for wastewater, stormwater, etc. Part 2, we're going to focus on stormwater financing, a more focus on costs and a focus on revenues. The challenge that we have in Massachusetts is the money for maintaining stormwater systems, like other systems, water, sewer, typically came from the general fund, and most Massachusetts communities over the years have minimized expenses by deferring maintenance and postponing new projects. This has led to an aging system neglected too long. For water and sewer, we then started to see special funds being enacted, either special revenue funds through special acts or the Massachusetts general laws adopting an enterprise fund, where you could raise fees and other revenue sources and dedicate those specifically to water or to sewer. We only see 3 of these right now, as I mentioned earlier. The MS4 permit will require communities to increase the level of maintenance, to upgrade parts of the drainage system, to begin monitoring stormwater outfalls and comply with minimum control measures. So your spending on stormwater is going to be increasing over the next several years. And what are those expenditures? There are over 200 Massachusetts communities that discharge stormwater under the MS4 permit. Those 6 control measures are the minimum. There are other stormwater expenditures to be spent, and typically they fall along these lines: salary and wages, purchase of service, supplies, intergovernmental expenditures, miscellaneous, capital, and debt service and other financing uses. So now you need to start thinking about stormwater revenues. The general fund, usually stormwater is funded within the Department of Public Works general fund budget, which is mostly supported by tax levy. And I would think right now in Massachusetts, most stormwater is being funded in most communities through the general fund. That could be a Proposition 2.5 override. You may receive some federal and state grants, as noted here. Stormwater is eligible for the Clean Water SRF program, and think about establishing a user fee-based stormwater utility and enterprise fund. And again, the theme here, to me, the next big thing that is coming down the road. So what is a stormwater utility? It provides a mechanism to generate revenue needed to effectively manage stormwater activities. It can have a fee-for-service arrangement in which residents and non-residents are charged for the service of managing stormwater, and fees are deposited into a dedicated enterprise fund account or a special revenue account. Revenues fund maintenance and upgrades of stormwater drains, detention bases, stormwater control structures, development of drainage plans, mapping of stormwater outfalls, and administrative activities. And a stormwater utility, per the statute, sets up a special revenue fund with related direct costs, but doesn't allow you to capture your general fund indirect costs if you adopt that special revenue fund language. That's a stormwater utility. So what's an enterprise fund? An enterprise fund is a separate accounting and financial reporting mechanism. That's all it is. The stormwater assets, liabilities, fund balance, fund equity, revenues and expenditures are segregated into a fund with financial statements separate from all other governmental activities. So if you adopt an enterprise fund, this separates particularly your revenues and expenditures into a separate fund and keeps it outside the general fund, and no one can touch this money other than stormwater. You can include indirect costs. Interest is retained within the fund, and an enterprise fund maintains its own retained earnings, its own surplus, the theory being to reinvest that surplus into the capital infrastructure for stormwater. So big picture, take a look at your stormwater costs, your direct costs for stormwater. Understand that there are indirect costs in the general fund. Understand that your Department of Public Works might have some indirect costs. And that's going to give you the total cost for stormwater. And how's that going to be financed? Maybe by stormwater fees, maybe by general fund taxes, maybe by some grants, or some other available funds. So what are your options relative to funds? You can finance stormwater as part of the DPW general fund, no special revenue fund, no enterprise fund. That's the baseline that I think most Massachusetts communities are dealing with today, where stormwater is in your DPW general fund budget and is funded most likely from taxes. So you really don't know the cost of that. You really don't know how much of your tax revenues are funding stormwater costs. Scenario 2, you adopt a stormwater utility by enacting Chapter 83, Section 16. Revenues go to a special revenue fund unless you identify that they're going to go to an enterprise fund. That's similar to the water surplus account for those of you familiar with Chapter 41, Section 69B. Number 3, include stormwater as part of the sewer enterprise fund. Fourth option is to adopt a stormwater enterprise fund by adopting Chapter 44, Section 53F and a half. You should always consult with your Bureau of Accounts representative from the Department of Revenue and consult with your town council when you're dealing with these Massachusetts general laws. So here's the stormwater statute, and I'm not going to read you the whole thing from Chapter 83, Section 16, but it allows you to establish just and equitable annual charges, and you may either charge a uniform fee for residential properties and a separate uniform fee for commercial properties, or establish an annual charge based upon a uniform unit method, and that's the residential dwelling unit method that we referenced earlier. The enterprise fund statute we've covered verbally on several slides, so I won't go into detail here, but this allows you to set up a separate fund, separate from the general fund, for a utility like a stormwater utility. It sets some ground rules that you must have a budget. You should be thinking about the revenue requirement you need to fund the 6 minimum control measures and your other stormwater needs. So how much money are you going to need to finance in order to address your wastewater, your stormwater needs? Determine what vehicle you're going to use for your stormwater fund. You can select general fund treatment by just continuing on what you're doing today. Or if you want to change that to a stormwater utility, Chapter 83, Section 16 would be your vehicle. And by so doing, you would also establish a special revenue fund. Thirdly, you could establish a stormwater enterprise fund, which segregates your stormwater revenues, costs, and your balance sheet from the general fund and other funds. You would need to determine your stormwater financing plan, the revenues needed to balance your expenditure budget, and finally, monitor your progress on stormwater compliance. So with that, we thank you for listening to this, and hopefully you are now more informed to make better stormwater management decisions.